The girl is unbelievably beautiful. Her skin has the hue of cream laying on the tongue with the soft density of velvet, and over the curve of her breast, a tongue would glide as if over a mound of vanilla ice cream, topped with a candied cherry. Piotr is certain that's exactly how she would taste, sweet, fresh, and cool, if only he dared to take a taste. Her hair, scattered on the pillow, is light with a red gloss, but to call it ginger would be like calling Beethoven's Fifth Symphony decent music. The color of that hair is pure poetry, a duet composed of sun and fire. That same color emerges from between white thighs and spreads into a neat little heart, something Piotr cannot help but notice with a shiver of excitement. He watches, collecting the details in his fleeting memory, just as a child gathers its treasures, full lips and a sweet, shapely nose, narrow hips and feet with high arches, where the skin is delightfully pink, like the inside of a seashell. Her eyes are closed, but Piotr knows that if she were to open them, their blue would fill his heart with peace, the kind one feels on a summer day, floating on the surface of the sea with eyes fixed on the high sky. Of course, the girl is also absolutely, completely dead, but well, you can't have everything. Piotr timidly touches her hand, then slides his fingers up to her wrist, where the blackness of a tightly wound cable had bitten into her pale skin. Under his feet, a discarded plastic shopping bag rustles on the floor. 5 minutes later, he's standing in front of the apartment door, feeling the gaze of the policeman on him, whose bulky frame and square jaw spoil the beauty of his memories. "Was it you who found her?" the man in the uniform asks sternly. Piotr doesn't know the man's name or rank, maybe he gave it, but details fall out of memory so quickly. "I did." His tongue stumbles, his mind empty. "The door was open, I saw." "You understand. She's my neighbor, something might have happened. I went in, called out, then I found her." "Did you touch anything?" "No." "Go back to your place." "Deck, go with him." The officer addresses the younger policeman, whose build resembles a coat hanger with a long nose and skin pink with acne. Piotr turns, opens his apartment door, and hears a snippet of conversation behind him. She lived with a boyfriend, maybe they liked rough play. So most likely it was him. Simple case. He tries to hold onto the image of the red-haired girl beneath his eyelids, but the memory is already slipping away, and he almost stops believing he ever saw her dead. He struggles to resist turning back and convincing himself that her body is indeed still lying there, with bound hands and warmth fading beneath that flawless skin. Act natural, he reminds himself, but it's impossible. Acting naturally can only be done by someone who doesn't know they're supposed to. Piotr is acutely aware of every move and gesture. Should he be scared or sad now? Or maybe just nervous? How would an innocent person behave in such a situation? He's sure he didn't kill the red-haired girl, but the awareness of his innocence paralyzes him more than a sense of guilt ever could. He sits stiffly, withdrawn into himself. He doesn't want to, but his body has other ideas. Under the suspicious gaze of the young man with acne, Piotr responds curtly, as if afraid his own tongue might betray him at any moment. Yes, he knew her by sight. They were neighbors after all. No, nothing deeper, just that they greeted each other on the staircase, and the red-haired girl, Marika, Piotr finally learns that her name was Marika, once or twice accepted a package for him, because the mailman comes in the morning when he's at work, and she was home most of the day. He doesn't know what she did. Maybe she took up evening studies, maybe she worked from home, or maybe both. He doesn't know her family or the boyfriend she lived with. He only ran into him briefly, on the stairs, when he was rushing to work or the store, throwing out a brief good morning, and recently also as Merry Christmas, as Christmas is just around the corner. He didn't even remember the boy's face. He was nobody, just an accessory to the beautiful girl. It was her that Piotr remembered, not him. He doesn't say that last part, though maybe he should. The whole problem with the past is that it's just as uncertain as the future. Words slip from your mouth so quickly and fall into a place from where they can't return. You can't retrieve them, examine them, make sure they're still as memory tells you they were. Piotr offers the policeman some tea and then, twice, he returns to the kitchen. Did he turn off the gas? Did he say anything that disclosed his fascination with the girl? Because Piotr is a discontinuous man, he always has been, or at least that's how it seems to him right now, because the present Piotr doesn't have much in common with Piotr from an hour ago, and that one, in turn, is different from yesterday's Piotr. The successive versions of Piotr smoothly transition from one to the other, and sometimes he thinks he manages to retain the core of his personality, and sometimes that he doesn't. Piotr thinks about his inconsistency in an inconsistent way, later in the evening, after the policeman has left, while he's replying to his sister's email. It's the traditional invitation for Christmas, which he accepts, though he doesn't really want to. He is not fond of Christmas, but the consequences of refusing might shake his fragile world, where so few things are certain. Then he prepares dinner and returns to the computer to check multiple times the content of the message he already sent. Did he reply to Dorota that he's happy to come to the Christmas Eve dinner, or did his treacherous hands type, "Fuck you, stupid cow"? Piotr takes a shower, then returns to the computer, stands up, sits down again. He checks once more if the gas under the kettle is really off. Did he kill Marika as he had kept imagining? Marika, the name tastes like a dried plum. The sticky sweetness of the long mart is broken by the acrid RI and the smoky K at the very end, like the final note in the bouquet of a wine. Marika. Piotr repeats her name in his mind as he starts the car in the afternoon to drive to the nearest supermarket. He needs to buy a present for his nephew. Dorota, with her characteristic subtlety, mentioned the title of a video game in her email, so he doesn't have to think too hard. Bread, some cold cuts, maybe a couple of cans of beer. He doesn't need anything more. After all, he won't be spending Christmas at home. The world outside is stuck between autumn and winter. The moment just before the first snow, when the air holds the promise of an icy storm, has stretched into 2 weeks of unbearable tension, like a Tarantino movie. Trees stripped of their last leaves, brown grass, a sky the color of cold lead. This is a dead world, devoid of the blessing of white, with winter lurking like a stranger behind the door. It's not visible, but it's palpable. The wind carries the scent of soil heavy with moisture and roots rotting beneath a layer of night frost. Snow could bring relief, but there is no snow, and at this moment Piotr almost believes that Christmas will never come. He's not the only one. In the supermarket, a man dressed as Santa Claus shakes a bell. It sounds flat and false, and people pushing carts loaded with goods smile without conviction. Merry Christmas, ho, ho, ho. Marika, Piotr savors the name. When he returns home, it's almost dark, the sky drawn with night-like storm clouds, their barrenness irritating his nerves. He sees a crouched figure by the building entrance, or is it just his imagination? A torn shop awning flaps in the gusts of December wind, and by the dumpster, where the air carries a sickly sweet stench, stray cats rummage around. Suddenly, a patchy shadow jumps into the circle of light cast by the street lamp, and with a terrifying meow, it dashes past Piotr. He curses, and just then, following the animal, a skinny figure emerges from the darkness. Robert. Piotr even remembers his name, Marika's boyfriend. Has the police already spoken to him, or is Robert hiding from them? Piotr stops for a moment, and then, irritated by his own cowardice, moves forward. Robert steps back, not taking his eyes off the approaching man. He's wearing a baggy hoodie, too thin for this weather, huddling into himself, hands shoved deep in his jeans pockets. For the first time, Piotr really looks at him, not just noticing in passing, but really looking, and is struck by the boy's resemblance to Marika. They are almost the same height, both slim, with faces as indifferent as elves. She had a bit of a boyish look, cutting her hair short, with narrow hips and small breasts, while he has something feminine about him, in his long lashes, the shape of his lips, the curls falling over his eyes that he impatiently tosses back with a flick of his head. As if, by being together, they were simultaneously moving towards each other, meeting somewhere in the middle of an androgynous unity. Robert, the name has no flavor, it's hard, grating between the teeth like earth-dirted stones. Nevertheless, this boy does possess a certain accessibility, something that could seem appealing if Piotr were inclined toward his own gender. Here's a possible scenario. Piotr offers Robert a cup of hot tea, and the boy follows him to the apartment on the second floor, where he lets Piotr take off that awful hoodie and do everything with his young body, and maybe more. Piotr walks into the darkness of the stairwell, while the possibility splinters behind him into a fan of unfulfilled pasts. Did he pass Robert in silence, or perhaps he did offer him tea and got rejected? Or did something else happen, something that now makes him feel the boy's gaze burning into the back of his neck as he climbs the stairs? At home, he puts the food in the fridge and places the game for Bartek on the desk. Then he turns on the computer, opens a can of beer, and logs onto an erotic chat. He uses different nicknames, secretly despising those who can't even type "Where are you clicking from?" correctly. He also despises the primitive ways of building an image. 20 centimeters and a six-pack are decidedly not his methods. Piotr is subtler, seducing by reinventing not just himself, but the entire world. Tonight, he's a shy boy, wearing an oversized hoodie, proposing a scenario for his fantasy. He'll be a conservatory student, and the woman he meets on the chat will be a teacher whose interests extend beyond just music. Well, at least he hopes it's really a woman. In this moment, he is one, concrete and consistent. Tomorrow, just as singular, though completely different, he will go to work, where for 8 hours he will answer phone calls and hunt and peck data into a computer. Perhaps it's high time he finally did something about it, find a real, non-virtual girlfriend, start living a normal life. His sister tells him this every year when they sit at the Christmas Eve table, and Piotr then makes an examination of his conscience and resolves to change. In those moments, he not only imagines himself as a different person, but he becomes them for an hour, 2, sometimes more. He once had a real girlfriend, Veronica, back in college. She claimed she could tell the difference between spring and autumn by the color of the sun's rays. Spring light is sharp and yellow like a lemon, she used to say, cool but full of life. Autumn light, on the other hand, is soft like amber with its edges smoothed by water. It's the only paradox in nature, when cold feels warm and warmth feels cold. They lived together for a while, but even then, reality rubbed Piotr the wrong way, like ill-fitting shoes. With Veronica, he felt indefinite, the boundaries of his fluid personality constantly attacked by her mere presence. Only when she left was he able to create himself anew. Before midnight, just as his fantasy scenario is getting into full swing, Piotr gets a message from a dead girl. A message from unknown sender, the messenger icon flickers, and Piotr freezes. Perhaps what he's feared for so long has finally happened. He never publicly shares his information, but the other Piotrs could have been less cautious. "Hi, it's Marika. Do you want to read our blog?" He stands up, walks to the kitchen, and reaches into the fridge for another beer. He drinks it with a quiet hope that by the time he returns, the past will have changed into one where no message ever existed. The excitement has completely drained from him, leaving a nauseating residue of anxiety. Whoever the man was who had just been entertaining himself with a woman from the chat is gone now, and Piotr can't believe he ever knew him. He returns to the computer, the screen pulses with another message, this time it's a website address. After a moment of hesitation, Piotr clicks the link, feeling like a castaway drifting on the waves of the most extraordinary possibilities. It's impossible to predict now what the future holds or what the past truly was. For a brief moment, Piotr genuinely believes the girl is alive, that he never saw her dead, maybe he only dreamt it. But even that is uncertain, as everything around him blurs and reshapes itself, stretching backward and forward in time. The thought that Marika might have noticed his interest and is now trying to reach out in such a peculiar way makes Piotr's head spin. So he clicks, quickly, before yet another possibility comes up. The blog is in black and white, styled in a way that vaguely reminds Piotr of Alphonse Mucha's paintings, lots of swirls and flourishes, with a font that mimics pre-war typography. From the first picture, Marika looks back at him. She's sitting on a park bench with her head resting on Robert's shoulder, her face shadowed by an overgrown beech tree. For some reason, Piotr is certain it's autumn, though the black and white photo reveals no color in the leaves, but there's a soft melancholy in the scene, and Piotr could bet that the light that day had the color of amber, smoothed by water over time, now round and soft without any sharp edges. Marika looks at him just like she did when he first noticed her. He had been walking up the stairs, and she was rushing down, hastily buttoning her coat, with her hat already pulled over her ears, hands tucked into gloves so red they would shame wild poppies. She threw him a belated good morning, glancing distractedly over the railing, and he started wanting her. Not immediately, it came later, slowly, so gradually that he missed the moment when Marika suddenly filled his world. But once it finally happened, the past curled up with a cat's purr and reshaped itself, and he knew he had desired this girl from the very beginning, from that moment when they still greeted each other indifferently on the stairs. It was also then that he realized she had been laughing at him all along, always mocking him. The mockery in her voice when she said good morning, the hint of derision in her blue eyes. He didn't dwell on the reason. It was likely enough that Marika's youth and beauty turned him into a hunched, balding man in his 30s, and that was something he couldn't forgive. Perhaps that's why, once, just for a moment, or perhaps for his entire life, he thought that he could kill her. It wouldn't be difficult. Marika never locked her door when she was home. He knew that because he'd seen Robert walk in 2 or 3 times, simply pressing down on the handle. Piotr could do the same. One possible scenario: he enters quietly, cautiously, barely daring to breathe. He's disoriented by the new space at first, but that passes quickly. After all, the layout of all the apartments in the building is the same. He finds the room that, in his own place, he calls the living room. Marika is there, sleeping on the couch, shrouded in the heat emanating from the heater. Beads of sweat trickle down her bare chest, rising and falling with steady breaths. The smell of alcohol is faint but noticeable. When Piotr leans over her, the thick scent of digested wine and beer hits his nose, as if he's walked into a wall. Marika came back home in the early morning again, and once more, he saw her, just like many times before, except this time he waited until Robert left the apartment so he could do what he had wanted to do. Continuation of the possible scenario: he ties her hands with the cable he brought, and she doesn't resist. She just wakes up and mumbles incoherently. Maybe she mistakes him for Robert. By the time she understands what's happening, it will be too late. Piotr will pull a plastic bag over her head, just an ordinary shopping bag, the kind you can get at any supermarket, and then tighten the edges around her neck and wait until she runs out of air. Later, he'll remove the bag to gaze at her face one last time, the bag the police will find on the floor, and just before that, Piotr will look at her, not fully understanding what he's seeing. Piotr gets up and walks over to the cupboard to check his supply of black cable, the kind he sometimes uses for small repairs. The coil is in its place, but he can't tell if it's smaller now or not. He returns to the computer, stands up again, walks back to the cupboard, and looks at the tightly wound coil of cable, closing the drawer and opening it again. Even the past from just a few seconds ago is no longer certain. The black and white blog blinks at him invitingly from the screen, but it takes Piotr a long moment before he summons enough courage to start reading.
First entry. Once upon a time, there was a little boy and a little girl. "I've thought of a new way to travel," the girl said one day. "The Earth spins on its axis in 24 hours, right? So all you'd have to do is go up somewhere high and wait for it to move beneath your feet. Imagine it, you sit in the air all day, and then hop, you land in America. Cool, right? You'd hit mountains on the way." The boy is skeptical. "Or fall into the ocean." "I'd be careful," the girl insists. "Besides, I could pick a spot where there aren't any mountains along the way. I just need to find a point that doesn't spin with the rest of the Earth. If I could do that, I wouldn't be in the middle anymore, I'd be on the outside. I'd just wait until I was exactly where I wanted to be."
That night, he tosses and turns restlessly under the covers, dreaming of loneliness, which has settled on his bed. Bristling with spikes, grey like a clump of dust, it leans over Piotr, and he feels its weight and smell, scratching at his throat, as if he were trying to breathe coal dust. He also dreams of time slipping away, minutes, hours, and days sliding through his fingers with the smoothness of soapy beads, a springtime first, and an autumnal last, coated in golden sadness like a croissant with icing, and finally, Piotr dreams that he's standing on a ship, staring at the restless sea, chewing on tasteless pieces of meat that swell in his mouth. He spits them out discreetly into the water, hoping the other passengers don't notice, but the meat keeps growing, more and more. Eventually, he realizes it's his own body, that he's tearing pieces of himself from the inside with his teeth and devouring them. He wakes up in the morning, exhausted, with a headache and an overwhelming feeling that Marika's spirit is in his apartment. Perhaps he even slept with her that night, though not in quite the way he would wish.
Second entry. Neither of them remembers a time when they were alone. In their memories, they are always together. His first memory, he reaches out his hand in the darkness, and she's there warm and soft, her hair smelling of strawberry shampoo. Her presence chases away the monsters lurking under the bed and lets him sleep peacefully. Her first memory, there isn't one, really. Robert was always there, and that's all. But if she had to choose, she'd point to the day he cried by the swing set, smearing the blood from his broken nose, and she came over and hugged him. The responsibility she took on that day would never leave her for the rest of her life.
Robert comes in the evening, 2 days before Christmas Eve, when there is still no snow, and despite the relentless carols and the city's Christmas decorations, the holidays seem light years away. Piotr isn't surprised by the visit. In a way, he had expected it. The thought even crosses his mind that he might have invited the boy himself. In the hallway, Robert takes off his coat, revealing a red dress over not-so-clean jeans, his pale auburn hair falling over his made-up eyes. "It's hers, Marika's," he explains, seeing Piotr's stunned expression. "This way, she's still with me, you understand?" Piotr nods, though he feels too bewildered to understand anything. "I'll get you some tea," he says. The boy with the painted eyes follows him to the kitchen. The red dress makes his youthful body seem more delicate, and the makeup accentuates the feminine features of his face. Robert looks almost pretty in his ambiguity, suspended between what is masculine and what is feminine. The accessibility Piotr had noticed in him before is now even more noticeable. By wearing the dress, Robert has stepped beyond the boundaries of his gender. He's no longer protected by conventions. His pure possibility, to which anything might happen. "The police are looking for you," Piotr mentions when the silence becomes uncomfortable. The boy shrugs. "They already found me. I talked to them. And they let you go?" "For now, but they'll probably arrest me eventually. They think I killed Marika." Piotr hands him a mug, and Robert warms his hands on it. He looks exhausted, the shadows under his eyes not just from makeup. "Did you?" Piotr hadn't meant to ask, but the words slipped out before he could stop them. Robert slowly shakes his head. Is it meant to say no, or perhaps I don't know? For some reason, Piotr becomes convinced it's the latter. Maybe Robert, too, is a discontinuous man. Maybe Piotr has finally found a kindred spirit. "It should have been me," Robert says slowly, while Piotr rolls his name around in his mouth, trying to find its taste. "I'm the one who should be dead."
Third entry. There is no talk of love as long as they are one and the same. He only begins to desire her when she becomes foreign to him, her maturing body so different from his, her love so unconditional, unrestricted by anyone or anything. At 11, the girl falls in love with Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who was ugly and unhappy, yet brilliant. It's a passion that flares up in flames and burns itself out in a few spring weeks. She can love the sound of piano music that feels like raindrops splashing on a face lifted to the sky, geographic names like Indochina or Ladakh, and the sound of the word canoodle. She loves stories, Kitty going to a ball in a tulle dress with a pink lining, Caravaggio and Hannah dancing to a melody played by a gramophone, and Corso with his rabbit-like smile, sleeping with a girl who was the devil. To him, all this wealth of feelings seems strange and entirely unnecessary. He is jealous before he ever falls in love. His love, from the very beginning, has a shade of anger. He wants to take away her otherness, to erase it as if it never existed, and make the girl his again.
From the moment he saw Marika on the stairs, every woman he flirted with online had her face, and sometimes even her name, if he managed to convince the stranger to use it. One possible scenario, he invites Marika over after one of those arguments he so often silently witnesses, their shouting matches that he listens to through the thin walls of the old apartment block, pretending not to hear at all. It was always Marika who shouted louder. Robert was gentler, his voice more pleading than angry. After such arguments, she would storm out, slamming the door, only to return in the early morning, with smudged makeup and reeking of cigarette smoke. He could open his door for her, tell her she looks tired, and offer her a cup of freshly brewed coffee. She would agree. He was, at least at times, certain of that. He had his vision of such a day, rain drumming against the window, the sun blurred by the grayness of a December morning. The day could be just like that, neither autumn nor winter, suspended in a timeless moment just for them. The girl would close her eyes, warming her hand on the coffee cup, her red dress pulled halfway up her thigh, revealing skin flushed pink from the cold. He could embrace Marika, speaking to her in a soothing tone, saying things that didn't really matter. In moments like these, the line between comfort and desire blurs, hands slip easily beneath layers of winter clothing, smooth and cool skin waiting for someone to warm it with their touch. He would undress her piece by piece until she was finally naked, all white, soft, and cold from the rain, a perfect being, neither female nor male, a tired angel in his bed, allowing Piotr to indulge as much as he wanted in her flawless body.
Third entry. There is no talk of love as long as they are one and the same. He only begins to desire her when she becomes foreign to him, her maturing body so different from his, her love so unconditional, unrestricted by anyone or anything. At 11, the girl falls in love with Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who was ugly and unhappy, yet brilliant. It's a passion that flares up in flames and burns itself out in a few spring weeks. She can love the sound of piano music that feels like raindrops splashing on a face lifted to the sky, geographic names like Indochina or Ladakh, and the sound of the word canoodle. She loves stories, Kitty going to a ball in a tulle dress with a pink lining, Caravaggio and Hannah dancing to a melody played by a gramophone, and Corso with his rabbit-like smile, sleeping with a girl who was the devil. To him, all this wealth of feelings seems strange and entirely unnecessary. He is jealous before he ever falls in love. His love, from the very beginning, has a shade of anger. He wants to take away her otherness, to erase it as if it never existed, and make the girl his again.
You sent me the link to your blog, didn't you? Now that the thought has crossed Piotr's mind, the explanation seems obvious. How could he ever have believed that the message was from dead Marika? I did. Robert sits on the couch in Piotr's apartment, dark tights clinging to his shapely calves, a short skirt showing more thigh than decency would allow. Why? He shrugs, signaling that the question isn't worth answering. Piotr is irritated by his attitude. Is every young person so indifferent and sullen, or is Robert simply grieving Marika's death? Which one of you wrote the blog? You or her? What difference does it make? We thought the same way. Is it true, what's written there? Robert smiles faintly with lips painted red. What's written there is what we remember. Maybe it happened that way, maybe it didn't. Don't you have memories that aren't real? No, of course not. So, what do you remember from your childhood? It was raining, and I went outside and floated a paper boat in the water running down the street. Piotr lists the most vivid memory he has. I was wearing a yellow raincoat and a funny yellow hat. It doesn't matter, we're supposed to be talking about Marika, not me. She wanted to break up with you, that's what it says. She broke up with me many times and always came back. I didn't kill her because of that, if that's what you're asking. Why did you come here, then? The boy reaches into the pocket of his pink hoodie and throws a folded piece of paper onto the table. A summons to the police, for you. They left it at my place this morning. Piotr unfolds the white rectangle. The interrogation is scheduled for tomorrow, December 24th. It seems unfair, but after all, Christmas Eve is just another workday. It seems you will have a fucked up Christmas, Robert says in an indifferent tone. He should stand up and leave now. That's exactly what Piotr wants because the tension and uncertainty are unbearable. Piotr can almost see it. The boy, who looks so much like a girl, gets up and heads for the door, heavy and awkward with the weight of his overwhelming sadness. But in the end, Piotr's reality loses out to Robert's, and the boy stays seated on the couch. Rain begins to drum against the windows, the sun blurred by the grayness of a December morning. Sometimes you look at me. Robert begins, and though Piotr doesn't want to, he asks. Like what? Like you want me? Piotr isn't sure what's in his eyes, mockery, a challenge, or just youthful defiance. Is that true? Staring at the figure sitting on the couch, Piotr feels no hint of desire. He slowly shakes his head. Maybe it's the clothes? Would you prefer I wore pants? That I was a boy? I don't know, maybe. Sorry, wrong address.
Fifth entry. On an autumn day, a boy and a girl sit on a bench in the park. She says something to him with excitement. He smiles, nods, and wraps a lock of her hair around his finger. Sixth entry. On an autumn day, a boy and a girl sit on a bench in the park. He says something to her with excitement. She smiles, nods, and wraps a lock of his hair around her finger.
The day is fading into winter grayness as Piotr sits at the police station, and a fat policewoman writes down his statement. She makes plenty of typos, Piotr notices, but doesn't have the courage to correct her. Name, surname, A dress. He looks out the window, tasting the word December in his mouth, rough and cold. December is a block of ice filled with dirt and stones, old frost lingering in the shadows even when the sun has long begun to shine with the lemon-colored brightness of spring. He shifts his gaze to the policewoman, who probably wishes she were home, preparing for Christmas Eve supper. Piotr understands, though not long ago, he had called his sister and, with a certain satisfaction, told her he'd be late because he had to go to an interrogation. Back then, he was a different person, someone who thought this whole thing was a good joke. Now he can't even remember what the joke was supposed to be about. The policewoman occasionally glances at the phone on her desk, discreetly checking the time. At one point, it rings with a festive tune, and she silences it with an impatient gesture. With lips pressed tight, she reads a text message. Husband or kids, waiting for mom to come home from work? Piotr wonders fleetingly. The policewoman suppresses her irritation and asks another question. Piotr wonders if anyone here will think he might actually be capable of killing someone. The longer he thinks about it, the more it seems like they might. The indifferent face of the fat woman seems to conceal an obvious, though silent, accusation. I didn't kill her, he says, when the tension becomes unbearable. I didn't even know her. The policewoman raises an eyebrow. Marika, Piotr says. I didn't know Marika. Marika Mikolajczyk is fine. This interrogation is about the murder of Robert Mikolajczyk. What are you talking about? Piotr stares blankly, seconds passing in silence. He finally closes his eyes. Robert? The policewoman becomes irritated. Don't play dumb. You're the one who found his body. The body, oh, right, Piotr remembers. The perfect body of a young man who looked a little, though fortunately not too much, like a girl. Pretty boy, he mutters. Pretty? The fat policewoman seems a little less indifferent now, a touch more suspicious. How well did you know him? Not very well. We ran into each other on the stairs sometimes, you know, how neighbors do. I thought about him sometimes, though he laughed at me. In what sense did you think about him? I don't know. That I'd like to touch him. That makes sense, doesn't it? The woman looks at him, and there's a sudden flash of fear in her eyes. Mr. Sulkowski, did you kill Robert Mikolajczyk? She asks, as if she's not sure she even wants to hear the answer. Yes, Piotr says with relief. I had to do precisely that. The policewoman swallows. Piotr has caught her off guard, which, in a way, brings him a small sense of satisfaction. He smiles, trying to ease the fear in her eyes, and then turns his gaze back to the window. It's almost completely dark now, and he realizes he probably won't make it to Christmas Eve dinner after all. Oh well. Despite this, he feels almost happy as the past settles around him softly, like the folds of a well-tailored coat. Of course, he remembers everything clearly. He never really cared about girls. His attraction to narrow hips and small breasts was, in fact, a hidden desire for the boyish body. It was only Robert who made him realize that. Now everything makes sense, his long-standing loneliness, the fact that he never felt comfortable in the company of women. As that young officer had said, it really was a simple case. Piotr doesn't stop smiling, even as the handcuffs click shut around his wrists. For a brief moment, a moment that encompasses his entire past and future, he finally feels like a man complete and continuous.